Okay, so in order to build our front end, we are going to be using one of my favorite frameworks, React. Okay, so React is a very popular JavaScript library slash framework library, whatever you want to call it, that essentially allows it plays with the JavaScript engine in terms of mounting and refreshing. It's essentially a really clever way of playing with JavaScript for loading that makes website use in general or application use in general with JavaScript much more efficient and therefore a lot more faster. And that's why it's, such a popular library that Facebook put together and so many applications use now, startups, etc. So we're going to be using React. It's really great. It's cool. If you've never worked with a framework for JavaScript before, it can be a little bit to get your head around some of the concepts. But, it's really not that bad once you get the hang of it. Just there's a bit of confusion in the beginning. That's normal. React, it's component based, so we're going to build these components out for when we build our application. I'm going to show you how to do that. And then you can easily pass information with props, and we can keep track of how we update and create our changes with state on the DOM. So we're going to show you how to do that as well. And you can build these simple components like we're going to see here. For example, they show us here's how to do that. So you write a class hello message. So this is a hello message component, and then you just render it. You can write a return, and then inside of React we can actually leverage HTML. So you might be thinking, whoa, is that HTML in JavaScript? Yeah, we can actually use some HTML and then play with HTML within our components like that, which actually makes the process way faster when it comes to building out components with HTML. And so it's called JSX essentially, which is essentially allowing us to write this HTML in JavaScript. And then we also have state, so we're going to be using state. And state is when we want to keep track of changes. State helps us make our application dynamic, right? So when we want, let's say, a timer to change, we see that we can create state to change the timer. And to pass that information over throughout our applications. So we do that by adding our state in a constructor and then setting the state and changing it. And then finally, we're going to use some of these mounting and unmounting features that React has to offer as well, which we're going to see. We can play again with the DOM, how we want to refresh things, how often we want to refresh things, when we want the timing of certain things to come up and appear before other things. These are all very powerful tools for making our application much more efficient. So if you're just seeing this for the first time, again, it may seem a little bit confusing to be looking at this, but that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. We're going to go through it step by step, and by the end of this course, not only are you going to have a fundamental for writing the applications, but you're going to have that with the basic foundations of React as well, or at least have a nice solid introduction on what you need on how to build our components, how to build components and different features using React. So go ahead, go to reactjs.org, check it out. You can go to the tutorials if you want to. For exercises, you can go through these tutorials, read through it a little bit, get familiar with React, or you don't have to. You can just jump on ahead and we can get started together and do the tutorials in real time as we build out our application, as we build out our application together. Okay, so that's it on an intro to React. Let's start reacting it up in the next video. Bye-bye. All right, so there's some activity going on outside, so you might hear a couple of strange big trucks moving around a little bit. I hope it's not too distracting. I've been doing my best to keep it out of the videos, but it might be a little bit in this one. Just a heads up. Anyway, let's just try to focus in and stay concentrated, because now we're going to start building out our first, at least the shells of our UI with React. So what we want to do first is go back to our DeFi staking app, and we can run just to recalibrate and make sure everything's up to date. Let's run a Truffle migrate reset. for our blockchain and make sure we get all the addresses and everything up and nice. So let's run that first. Truffle migrate. Okay, and we see that our contracts have been deployed. We're back up on the blockchain. Excellent. So now let's open up the code in our text editors. So I'm opening up my Visual. So I'm opening up on my Visual Studio Code, and we're back. All right, so we see that we have all of our files, directories over here. So I've got the source, we have the test that we wrote, the scripts. In the source, we have our contracts, we have our JSON, and then we also see that we have a file called components. So I want you to open up the component file, right-click in components, and we're going to create a new file in our components. Because if you remember from the first video when we started building this application together, we said that the components is where we were going to be building the front end. So the components is where we're going to be storing all of our components. And what do I mean by components? Well, I mean the components are the individual pieces of functionality in our application. So the nav bar, the functionality, the logic to actually bring in the blockchain information to make it visible, accessible, to change the state of what's going on the state of what's happening in terms of transactions, in terms of the transactions on the blockchain. So the state of the blockchain, if you want to think about it that way as well. All right, so let's go into the component file directory, right-click, click on New File. And we're going to go capital A, so camel case, app. So we're going to write app.js. Okay, so the app.js is essentially where we're going to be, it's essentially our main application where we're going to be rendering all the components and the functionality. This is sort of the core. We want to think of this as our core output for this application. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to see as we build other components, but essentially this is going to be the mothership output, so to speak. So what's the first thing that we want to do when we are writing React? When we are writing React code? Well, the first thing we want to do is actually let JavaScript know that we are using the React library, that we're bringing it in. And what we're going to do is we're going to write import React, comma, we're going to want a component, okay, from React. And just like that, we've imported React. And okay, we're done. We've imported React. You can go home. It's all over. Excellent work. Okay, just kidding. It's not that easy. But essentially this is how we bring in React. And whenever you want to be writing React code for your applications, you have to bring in React so that way we can leverage JSX and our components and all the things that come with React, okay? And so the next thing we want to be doing here is actually creating a class for our component. So the way we do that is we name our component. So we do class app extends component, and then we bring in our curly brackets, because everything that's going to go in here essentially is going to be our React code. React code goes in here, and I'll just comment that in. Okay, and so as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, we want to render essentially all of our state, all of the blockchain information, everything here. So what we do is we actually bring in render like this. Okay, and then we can return. And within here, our return, we can actually return if we want JSX. And now when I talked about JSX, I was talking about bringing in HTML into our JavaScript. Whoa. Can you do that? Is that possible? Yes, absolutely. This is the beauty of working with React. And so how do we do that? Well, we can actually write a div inside of our return. And in this div, we can actually now write some, in this div, we can now actually write something if we want to be writing some HTML. I can put a header, for example, and in this header, I can write hello world. If I can spell hello world, hell world. Yeah, maybe it could be that too sometimes, but let's go with hello world, okay? And then finally, what we want to do after this is when we're done, we want to export our component so that once it's exported, the script can run and we can register this into our index and it'll show up when we actually launch our local server. And how do we export? Well, it's really simple. All we have to do is write export default and our component, which is app. All right, and is it as simple as that to actually get React working? Well, let's give it a shot together, and let's go back to the terminal. Okay, so back to the terminal over here, and to launch our development server, make sure that we're back in the DeFi staking app, and then just type in npm run start. Okay, and this is going to launch our localhost development server. So let's see here, npm run start. And npm run start is going to execute the script React scripts start, which if you remember was in our package JSON. We actually have the scripts where we set our start script to React script start. And it's going to load up here on the localhost 3000. And there we go. Hello world. We did it. And if this is the first time that you've ever done this, congratulations. You've just entered an entire world of hello worlds indeed. And what you want to do is, if you're using Chrome or Firefox or something like that, you want to bring out your development tools. So if you go into tools, browser tools, you can get to web developer tools. And in the console, we can actually run console logs and we can actually see what's going on with errors. When we're building out our front end, helps us to debug. It's great to have this. It's great to have this dev tool open. As we're coding and we're working. All right, so let's open up the dev tools. We've got the hello world almost done. Why don't we just style it up just a little bit so we can see how that works as well. So if we go back to our code, go back to our app.js. Well, how would we style this out? Well, there's a few ways that you can style in React. And again, this isn't a course on styling, so I'm not going to get so into it. But one way is you could actually just create a CSS file. So what you would do is you would right-click, we create a new file in our components, and we can call it app.css. And then we could essentially just write CSS in this app.css file, and all we would have to do is just import the CSS file by going import app CSS. And by doing that, we essentially just bring in our app CSS, and then we can add those styles here by bringing them in by either ID or by class name. And what's interesting with JSX that you'll note, it's not class-name, it's actually class name, and we use the camel case like that. That's just how JSX works. And we also have bootstraps, so we can bring in some class. So for example, if I type in class name equals text center and I save this, if we go back to our page and we refresh, would you look at that? We have now centered the text of the hello world. Amazing. Okay, so now we are starting to stylize our very first React component. All right. I know it's not the most incredible styles ever, but we're going to get there. This is just to show you how React works, how you can use HTML, how React works, how you can use HTML in React, or JSX, how you can stylize it, how you create an app component, and how you import and export. That's really the fundamentals for React. After this, to take it to the next level, we're going to learn about props and state, and then from there it's really your own journey and adventure of getting familiar and expanding your own skill set with React. So I have thrown a lot of new things at you, especially if you're new to React. If you're new to coding, then it's perfectly fine to look at code like this with a hello world and kind of just be looking at it like, what's going on exactly here? What are all these terms, these divs? the syntax of how things are being written out, especially if you don't have any prior background in web development. So I want to make this styling video for those of you who have no background for those of you who are just starting in web development and haven't done any style, because in the front end section, as we're going to see, I will be styling here and there, throwing in Bootstrap, throwing in styles of CSS in our React with JSX. And if you're not familiar with any of these things, it can seem, so this video is really just for those of you who don't have that prior web experience and you want to learn more about how styling works in websites. And if you already have that experience, then just feel free to skip on to the next video. Okay, so in the last video, we actually created our hello world, right? We imported React. In order to do that, we made an app component. We made an app component called app, and then we introduced the render and a return. And when we return in our render, this is the render in our React will render to the web page. That's what this is going to do. And then we return something. So we create these divs. And the divs essentially are containers that allows us to write, containers that allows us to put our HTML and our CSS and our styling so that we can get a visual display. And inside these containers, we can actually add styles. Now we're adding styles text. So we're adding the style text center, right? We add the style text center by using class name. So if I remove the text center, okay, then we know text center, and we save, we see that our hello world no longer is centered, right? And that should make sense. And where does this text center come from? Well, it comes from Bootstrap, and we're going to see how that works a little bit later on. Well, the point of this video is just, the point of this video is just to define these terms a bit more concretely. So what is actually CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And we use it in order to style our HTML. Now, HTML is the most common markup language to build websites. And we say when we want to add text, when we want to add forms and tables, we use HTML to do this. Okay, that's what HTML is for. CSS adds the style, right? Here, I'll even comment this. I'll comment this in here so that you have some notes. HTML is the markup language. The markup language for writing basic text and website. Okay. And whereas CSS styles the website. Okay, so colors, fonts, sizes, all of that stuff. Okay, and then JavaScript allows the websites to be dynamic, right? So JavaScript gives life to the websites. All right, so you can bring in a button with HTML, but how do you actually make that button open up another page or do something specific? How do you make that button actually launch a timer or do something specific? Well, you can do that with JavaScript. Okay, so HTML is going to set down, it's the markup language, CSS styles the website, and then JavaScript allows the website to be dynamic. Now, when we use React, it's not so explicitly there, right? But if you look through our files here, we actually do have an index.html file over here. Okay, you'll see it in the public folder. And if you look at the index.html file in our public folder, you're going to see that it is an HTML file, of course. So we are bringing in HTML. We just don't use it. We just don't use it when we're building out our React because we don't have to. We already set up our code in such a way that we connect to our HTML, but then we build through it with React. Now, if that's confusing for you, that's totally normal, but hopefully this is helping you at least a little bit to get a better idea of how these things are connected. So class name invokes CSS pages, which we don't actually see because we are grabbing it from Bootstrap. And where is Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap is in our index.js file, right? So if we click on index.js, which you can find in our source folder, we're going to see bootstrap dist css bootstrap.css. See, this .css is actually our CSS page with all of the class names that brings in this text center. So this text center is just not coming out of nowhere. This text center is coming from a Bootstrap CSS page, and that's what allows us to center the hello world. Okay, so let's go back to looking at CSS and style and what CSS is and how it works with websites. I mentioned in the previous video that if we want to style things, style our text, style our website, we can bring in a property in our div called style and then add two curly brackets, double curly brackets, and this will allow us to actually style CSS directly in our React projects and style our websites up. This is a faster way to bring CSS directly in, but it's not necessarily the better way to do it. In fact, this can actually be cumbersome and redundant. So if I want to style this hello world, like let's say I want to change the color to green, what I could do with CSS is I could just type in style, bring in the double curly brackets, then add the color parameter, and then set it to a color. And I'm going to put it in strings because it's going to recognize it in a string format. And so if I want the color to be green, I can save, then go back to our hello world, and there we go. Back on our local host, if we refresh the page, now our hello world is green. Okay? If I want to increase the size, I could add a comma. Okay, and here, let me just bring this in like that. I got a comma, and I type in font, then camel case size. Okay, and then I bring back the strings again, and then I will type in 30 px for pixels, right? Now, if we save that and we go back, okay, so now our hello world has increased in size. So what I'm doing effectively is that I am writing CSS directly in React. Okay, I'm bringing in these properties, colors, font size, and now I'm affecting everything that's within this div because I am executing a style in this div. So whatever is going to be in this container is going to be affected, okay, by what is in here. If I make another div underneath, for example, and I type in hello, and if I make another div, it's going to be red because we can't just have our divs outside like this of the return. They would also have to be wrapped in a div. So I would have to make a third div and then wrap everything in this div. But if I save this and I go back, notice how this second hello is no longer styled, even though we've added our style of green and font size. Now, if you don't understand why that is, just pause the video and think about it for a second. Okay, so hopefully you thought about it. Whether or not you understand it, let's take a look right now together. So what happened, as I just mentioned before, this div section, this section on our website will be the only section that will be affected by the color and the font size because we've only added the style to this section. If we wanted this div and this div to have the same style, how would we do that? Okay, so in order to apply these properties to both of these texts that we've written out, we could actually just remove the style here from this div. Oops, make sure it's closed, and then add it to the top div. Now, if I do that and I save and I go back, if you take a look, the second hello has now changed as well. So this hello is now also green, as well as the first one. Okay? Very nice, very nice. For your exercise, you can go ahead and figure out how to stylize this React component more. So do some stylization, increase the font of the hello world. So let's make it larger. Let's push it down a little bit if you want. Play with the hint, you can play with the margin of it. And then also maybe add another text box in here. Add an image. If you figure out how to add an image in here, that can be bonus. So that's your exercise. Have fun with that. And in the next video, let's get back to building out our application. So we've looked at some very basic styling in terms of inline styling with React, as well as just what it means to be working with HTML and CSS and JavaScript in the background when we're working with React, because it's still there in the background, just the way that we build projects. It's different than the traditional standard model. And we also talked about where this text center came from. We mentioned Bootstrap. We mentioned that we bring in a library called Bootstrap, and what Bootstrap does is that it allows us to bring in styling into our project, and then we can just call these different styles like we do in our app when we bring in text center. And that actually centers our hello world. Now in the upcoming videos on the front end, I'm going to be working with Bootstrap and bringing in quite a bit of styles here and there. And I don't want to alarm or overwhelm you if you're totally new to styling and totally new. When you see me adding all these class names, I just want you to know that it's not magic and I'm not inventing these things. It actually comes from Bootstrap. Now, if you go to getbootstrap.com/docs/3.4, okay, or you can just go to the docs and then you can find it that way as well. Okay, you're gonna see a landing page over here with an option to download. Now I want you to just click on the components tab over here. Okay, now when you click on the components, these components essentially are the styling for the different components that we're going to be building. Right? So in the upcoming video, in the next video, we're going to be building a nav bar together. And if you look on your right-hand side here, you're going to see a list of different types of components you can add to a website. Progress bars, panels, navs, input groups, drop-down menus. If we click on nav, we're going to see that we have examples of what navs are and what they do. Okay? So, and then we can actually see what we need to bring them in, and then what they look like. So if I scroll down a little bit, for example, let me scroll down. So we can see an example here of a nav, okay? And so we have an example of what it is, and then we have an example of the code underneath, and we can even copy the code. Now, the important thing is not to copy the code because this actually would go into an HTML file. But remember, we're going to be using React, and that's different. Instead of using class, for example, we use class name. Right? But we're still going to essentially be bringing in the same type of components that Bootstrap creates for our components, right? So navbar header, for example, or container fluid. So just in case you're curious as to where I'm getting these in the upcoming videos, you can add videos. If you're interested in learning more about how to work with Bootstrap and adding your own styles, then I highly suggest you go to their website and you do a little bit of investigation on your own. Anyway, as we code along together in the following videos, we're going to be consistently styling elements as we build out our components together, as well as leveraging Bootstrap. So we're going to be doing it quite a bit together. But again, if you're new to this, hopefully that just helps shed some light. Again, I don't want to take too much time in this course focusing on styling because primary initial focus should be on the application, connecting the front end with our blockchain data, with our smart contract logic, and our smart contracts. Okay, keep up the good work. See you in the next video. All right, so now that we've got our hello world working and our front end is starting to get built here, let's create the nav bar so that, if you remember in the nav bar, we have our account information displayed and the name of the app. So we want to build out this nav bar together. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go back to our components and make a new file. And we're going to call it, as you probably guessed, navbar.js. Okay. Now, what are we going to write at the top here, do you think? Well, we're working with React again. So same thing, right? We want to import, here we want to import React, no, React component from React. Okay, and next up we're going to basically just do the same thing that we did with app, only for our navbar. So you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, class app extends component. We're going to rename app to navbar. If I can spell it, I don't understand how to spell. Okay, and then we're going to export default navbar instead of app. All right, and here let's just get rid of this hello world, and let's just have our div set up. So we'll get rid of this comment. All right, and as simple as that, we've got the shell of our navbar set up. Now to help us on our quest to make a navbar, we don't actually have to write div. React has a built-in nav, so we can switch our divs to nav. Excellent, and this kind of works like a div, except it is customized for navbar. So now we're bringing in a nav. Excellent. And once again, we're going to bring in some built-in styles here. So class name equals, and we want to have navbar. We're going to do navbar dark. We're going to do flex top. Sorry, this is going to be fixed top. We're going to have shadow. P is going to be O. Okay, and we can also access styling in our JSX as well. And it's not something that you should really do that often, because it's better to kind of separate your styles. But if you're just adding a small style adjustment or something here and there to your component, it's a great tool to bring in. So we can actually just bring in CSS by writing style like this and double curly brackets. All right, and now by doing this, we can actually add style, and we can just write. So if I want background color, I can do this, and I can set it to black. And if I want the height, I can do height, and I can put in 50 pixels. And we want to separate this with a comma, just like in CSS. So we're basically bringing in the CSS. It's very similar, except for, again, we're doing background color camel case here, and we're using semicolons. All right, so now within our navbar, we can actually add some more. We could add some more HTML. So let's make an A. Okay, and since we're going for a black background color for the nav, let's put the text style to be white. So we're going to create another style here, and we can just do that by typing in color essentially. And I can say white, and here we can actually write what we want our to title our application here. So why don't we say DApp yield farming, or DApp yield staking, and then parentheses decentralized banking. All right, and then under here, let's add a list. So we're going to do UL. Then we're going to add our list item, and we're going to make it small. And then within here, we can add the account number. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll make sure that the style, the color is white. So we're going to go color white again. And then we're going to write over here. Or you know what? We'll just write it next to it over here. We're going to write account number like this. Okay, so let's save this, and let's just go over what we did before we continue here. So we imported React. We created a navbar component by typing in class navbar extends component. Now we render the component down. We bring in a nav from our JSX, and then we bring in some styling with class names. So this is some built-in. We've got built-in styling. We have navbar, which sets up the navbar. We have navbar dark. These are templates. This creates a dark template. We fix it to the top. So this is going to push our navbar to the top. We add some shadow, and then we style the background to black, and we increase the height. And then for the writing inside of it, we make it white. And then we add a list underneath. We add a UL and a list item underneath, where we add an account number. So we're going to save this, and let's render this. Now here's a question for you. How do we take this navbar and render it in our app.js? So I want you to pause the video here and try to take this nav bar and actually render it in our application or our application. So go ahead and try and do that. Okay, so hopefully you had some success giving that a shot. Let's do this together. So in order to render the nav bar in our app, all we really have to do is save this, go back to our app.js, import the nav bar, and then just render it. It's as simple as that. So how do we do that? Well, it's very similar to how we imported our app CSS. What we want to do is we want to say import, and we're going to say nav bar from the directory. That's the dot and the slash nav bar. Okay. And now in our return, what we can do is we can create another div to wrap our div around this div here. So we're wrapping our div like this. And then underneath this div, we're going to bring in our nav bar, just like that. And now let's hit save and see what happens. And we see that it says failed to compile. White is not defined. Okay, and it's telling us where it's coming from, the nav bar. So let's go back to our code. Let's go to nav bar. And oh, it's a little mistake here. I can't just write white. It has to be in string format. So we're going to put this in the string. And we'll save that. And let's go back. And would you look at that? There you go. So now we have our nav bar. And we see also our account number on this side. Okay, awesome. And a couple things to address here. There's a bit more styling that I would like to do. So let's go ahead and actually do a little bit more styling together. And you can also note that the hello world is actually being hidden underneath this, but that's okay for now. We're going to fix that afterwards. We're not even using the hello world. That was just to kind of show you how to get something up quickly and running on React. But let's just let's just do a couple more styling things here to our nav bar before moving forward. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Studio Code, back into our nav bar. So in our A, we're going to add another class name here, and we're going to bring some more styling. So we're going to do try nav bar brand. We're going to try colon, some 3, col, md2, and a margin of 0. So let's save that and refresh. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Let's keep going. In our UL here, we'll add some more styling as well. We'll go nav bar / nav and px3. So let's save this. Okay, now our account number is looking better. And basically what we're doing here is we add some margin, some colon, some more navbar brand. I don't want to spend so much time on this because it's not a stylized course, but I do want this looking nice. And I want to show you how you can actually do this. So you can read up more on the styling and everything. It's a whole world you can get lost in. I'm more interested in the functionality. But I don't want it to look bad either. But I do want it to look decent at least. So, all right, what else can we add? LI, we're going to add some class as well. No wrap. Sorry, this should be text. No wrap like this. We're going to have nav for items, so we can do nav item and dsm none, dsm block. We're also going to change this to capitals, and we'll add a colon here. And we're also going to add an ID here. Now let's save this, and let's go back to our. Okay, so the account number is going to go here. DApp yield staking over here. This is looking nice. This is looking much better now. And finally, the last thing that I'd like to bring in here is a picture to make it look a little bit nicer, right? So PNG, so we can add a little icon next to our DApp yield staking here, just to make it look even more kind of classy and professional. So we want to bring in actually the bank PNG that you can find here. So we see we have this nice bank PNG over here, and we want to place this next to our DApp yield staking over here. So in order to do that, we can just import it. So we want to import bank, import bank from, and to go, we want to go out of the directory. So to do that, we do 2 dots, dash, and then we'll see the list here. We want this, okay? Bank.png. And now that we have it, we can actually just bring it in as an image source, like you would do with HTML. So we're going to bring it underneath our A here, and we will say, or actually, sorry, we want it within our A. And we're going to go here, and we're going to write img source, and then we just bring it in like that. And we can close it up. And if we save it like this, we should actually see the image come up. Okay, so there's our image. It's a little bit wild looking, but don't worry about that. We can just add a bit of style and fix it. And we can just add some width, 50, and height, 30. And notice how I don't need to use class name. I could just put in the width and the height. Because we're using the img source, it allows us to bring in these parameters. Well, let's just do some class. Let's do some more style. We can do D inline block, and we want to align it to the top, right? So let's go ahead and save this. And okay, it's starting to look better. At least now it's not taking up the majority of the page. It's a little bit too close to this. We can fix that. And notice also that in our browser here in the console, it's telling us that there's image elements must have alt prop with meaningful text or an empty string. So in order to, this essentially just gives us an alt in case the image doesn't load, so you can have a text instead. Okay, you know, which is important for people who can't. People with phones that can't load the images properly, let's say. So what we want to do is, we just add an alt here like this, and we can say bank image, let's say, and then over here, let's say, and then to give it space, we can say and beep. We'll add some space here. And this is just going to add a little bit of space between our text. Let's try that. Okay, great. This is looking really nice. Actually, I want to switch the image. I want the image to be on the other side. So what I'm going to do actually is move this after the image. So we're going to move this over here instead. And then I'm going to put this, it's going to have to go over here. So let's save that. And there you go. Awesome. All right. So that's the navbar styling pretty much. I think that completely finishes it up for us for navbar styling. And again, I don't want to get too crazy on all this styling stuff. But this is some basic styling. That's all it is. We're using CSS. There's no fancy coding here. Just getting things to look a little bit better before we move ahead and build out our blockchain functionality. And all we really did here was we brought in some templates. We brought in some already built-in templates with our navbar dark, fixed top. We moved things and we aligned things properly. We brought an image in. And then we export it, etc. And that's really it. It's as straightforward as that. We export it into our app, and then we render it down. So now we have our navbar and we have our app. Now that we have these two things done, we can actually move on to some more fun and exciting JavaScript. We're going to build out our constructor and our state, and we can start bringing in the blockchain functionality. Okay, great work going through this. If you want as an exercise, if you're into the styling, go ahead and style this navbar up even more. Find your own image, replace it, change the color, change the background color, get it looking the way you want it to be looking. This is your application now. You can take this and build it into whatever you want. That's an exercise if you're into styling, but again, that's optional and not the main focus of this course at all. So have fun, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye for now. All right, so we've got our nav bar built out. We've got the app, which is returning the nav bar, rendering it, and we can see it. We don't need this hello world, so I'm just going to delete this for now. Okay, so next up, let's go back and think about what we were doing in this nav bar. We were essentially we are displaying the DApp yield staking, so we know what it is. So we have the title of our app, and then we're also displaying the account number. Now, right now, there is no account number. We could have hard code a number, like if I were to write 0 blah 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 blah, and click save and go back to our local host, we're gonna see the account number, an account number show up. But this isn't the account number we want. Remember, the account number that we actually want is from our MetaMask. It's the account that we're hooked up into. It's the second account, which is the account that should be in our Ganache, this account. So we want this account. And yeah, I could copy and paste that account in, but that would be very unproductive, and it would not show whether or not things are actually working. It's not what we want, right? What we actually want is for the account number to show up somehow here with JavaScript, right? So how do we do that? How do we get the account number? Well, this is where props and state come into React. This is how we take JavaScript. This is how we take our application and make it dynamic. And so let's go through this together and write it out. So we're going to go to our app.js, okay? And then inside our class app, what we're going to do is we're going to write a constructor, okay? And this constructor is going to take props. And props is a special feature in React. Props is a special parameter in React, which allows us to pass over properties from one component into another. And we're actually going to set props into our super as well. You don't putting props in your super, you don't always want to do this, but we're going to add props into our super, and I'm going to show you in a bit why this is important. And now in our constructor is where we want to set our state. So to set our state, we're going to call upon this. So we're doing this for our super dot state is going to equals, and here we can add our state. Now, since we're going to have a lot of state, we're going to create an object and put our state into this object. And here we can actually set up our state. So we want to have a count, for example, to be our account to have state. So 0x0, and basically the design of how this works is that when you set up state, what you do is you can then type in what you want to set to state. So we want an account, and then what kind of state. So here it's going to be a number. So we're going to set this up as a string. And essentially by doing this, we are initializing our state. This is what's going to be changing. So 0x0 is our default. But once we get the blockchain information, we're going to be able to set the blockchain address from our Ganache into this account with state. And if that's really confusing, and if this is all really confusing and you've never worked with JavaScript and React and state before, don't worry. It takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around it. But once you do, it'll make a lot of sense. So just stick with it for now. So the next thing that we want to do here is, now that we've set up state, we want to send this state as props into our nav bar, right? Because we want this account information to appear in our nav bar. So how do we do that? Well, if we go to our nav component down here, what we can do is we can create a property called account, and we can, called account, and we can actually set it to this dot state. It's got to be equal. Here we go. This dot state dot account. And just like that, it's really as simple as that. We now have applied state to our account into our nav bar by passing it through props. By doing this and saving, now if we go to our nav bar, we actually have access to the state because we have passed props into our nav bar. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me actually show you. If we go next to our account number here now, I can add a space, bring in curly brackets, so I can type some JavaScript, and I can say this.props.account. And if I save this and we go back to our local server, would you look at that? If you look at the top right hand, we have now set state to our account number. So that 0x0, if you remember, comes from the state that we created in our application, in our main app. So we initialized our state, then we sent it to our nav bar, and then now in our nav bar, we actually see the state pop up like this. And there it is. If you change the state, and if you were to change the state, if I were to come here and add more numbers to this and save, then this will refresh and we will get the new account number. This is what we want. This is what state means. It's dynamic. Now, okay, I know it's not the right account number yet, but this is just to initialize state. Initialize state, and to get you familiar with props and state in React. In the next following videos, we're going to be setting up our state to the blockchain, and that's when things are going to start to get really interesting. Okay, so great work going through this. Again, this can be confusing, especially if it's the first time you've ever seen a framework with framework on JavaScript. So relax, take it easy if that's the case. Go through it a couple of times. It takes everybody a couple of times the first time they go through things like this.